always roll my eyes a little bit when people are like, oh, I just love helping other people. I'm like, really? Is that really why you became a manager? I'm not sure I believe that. It certainly wasn't why I became a manager. I don't love helping people. I, a little, I do, but like that wasn't my driving motivation.
So Charity, it's great to have you on Breaking Changes. I'm super excited to be having a conversation with you. I'm always really excited to talk to you. And I think you'll have a lot of good things to say to our audience about different breaking changes in the world.
Oh, this is my favorite topic, failure.
Great. So let's start by just giving people who especially don't know you a little about your background. How did you get here? What are some of the other things you did before Honeycomb?
Yeah, I am a serial dropout. I was homeschooled. I dropped out of every higher ed that I've ever tried. I was a music major. And prior to Honeycomb, I really identified as an operations engineer. I really kind of enjoyed being like the first infrastructure engineer who would join a group of software engineers who thought they were onto something for real. And well, it's time to get production ready and time to like do things, build pipelines and everything. My heart is very much with production and operations. And like, I feel like production is where beautiful computing theory meets very messy reality, and I love it. So I never planned on being a founder. I was never one of those kids who's like, I'm going to start a company, because I kind of low key hate most of those people because they're like too good to work for someone else. I am not too good to work for someone else. In fact, I'm never starting another company. This is the one and only. But and I guess it was 8 years ago now, my co-founder Christine and I just we had this really kind of life-changing experience at Parse after we had been acquired by Facebook, where it was just kind of like we couldn't imagine going back to the world before observability tooling, and so we decided to start something. I am as shocked as anyone that we haven't failed yet. Like the plan in the beginning was just, well, we're definitely going to fail, but for the first time in my life, it's like I have a pedigree leaving Facebook, and VCs have never offered me money before. So I was like, well, I kind of feel this obligation to take it and run on behalf of all the women and queers and like dropouts in the world. Like you can't say no to an opportunity like that. So we took the money and ran, and it was touch and go for the first 4 or 5 years. But I'm proud to say that at this point, we cannot fail for at least 3 more years.
Love it. Yeah, before we dig into Honeycomb, I'd love to dig in a little bit more to how you got to Parse, because I feel like, that seems to have set you on the current trajectory.
Yeah.
How'd you get into startups in the first place?
Startups, I've spent my whole career at startups. My first real job was at Linden Lab, the Second Life, years ago. And I bopped around from startup to startup, and I was doing the same thing at Parse. Parse is actually the one time in my life that I've ever responded to an engineering recruiter. She wrote me a message that was like personal and, talked about the product. And I was like, well, this sounds interesting, very much up my alley. And I loved it. But like, honestly, after Linden Lab, I came out, and Linden Lab was such a great experience. I really loved my time there. And after that, I was like, well, I want to do something, cutting edge. I think mobile's getting really big. I want to do a Silicon Valley startup. So I went to this startup down in South Bay, and it was everything I had thought that I wanted, but I hated it. Like, and so right after that, I was like, okay, that was bad. Instead of optimizing for those things, I want to work someplace that's in the city that I can walk or ride my bike to, somewhere where I know the people and I know there's awesome people there. And I went there, and it was everything that I had asked for, and I hated it. And so the next time I was like, okay, I want there to be great people, but like the problem with the second company had been like the technology was old. Like they were using Perl, they were using just like SSHing in everywhere by hand, and I was just like, it needs all the ingredients, right? You need to be working in technology that you like, that's pushing your boundaries, that's challenging, that's hard. It needs to be with cool people. It needs to be a product that, can succeed. I had also, like, prior to that point, I think I was like, I'm a backend engineer. I don't care what the product is. I'm kind of like, a little snooty about that.
Hmm.
Parse was where I learned I absolutely care. Of course I care. Everybody cares about the product that they're working on. There's an energy, there's an excitement when people actually want the thing that you're building. And once you've kind of learned to feed off of that, you don't want to go back. You don't want to work on something that nobody cares about. So Parse was very much where I learned that lesson and the lesson of the contribution that design makes
Hmm.
to something that people love. Parse with a mobile backend as a service, and the AWS mobile SDK was always better than Parse. It always had more features, could do more stuff, but people loved Parse in a way that they never loved the AWS mobile SDK because it was well designed, because, not just the look and feel, but also the APIs, like everything had it was elegant, it was minimalist, there was a lot of thought that was put into like what we were building. And it really kind of set the bar for me coming out of that for the experience that you want engineers to have interacting with your product.
Awesome. Seems like a great foundation for Honeycomb. And you mentioned being an operations engineer at heart, but I would say you're one of the more iconic engineering leaders in the field these days. So, how did you get into leadership?
Oh, because I wanted to have a seat at the table. I was tired of decisions getting made without me. And I was tired of information not being given to me straight. And I was like, well, if I need to be a manager, then I will be a manager. So I have a lot of empathy for other people who got into, like, I always roll my eyes a little bit when people are like, oh, I just love helping other people. I'm like, really? Is that really why you became a manager? I'm not sure I believe that. It certainly wasn't why I became a manager. I don't love helping people. I, a little, I do, but like that wasn't my driving motivation, which is why I care so much about management that enables people and unlocks that doesn't,
Hmm.
like, so many managers hoard information because it gives them power, and they dole it out in morsels. And that's not what it's about, right? It's about making sure that people are in the room where it happens, and making sure that people do have things to
Hmm.
own.
Hmm.
Managers are in such a great position to, like, make sure that everybody gets, the autonomy and mastery and meaning, right? That's what Dan Pink says we all care about from our work. Managers are in such a great position to help people actually own their shit. You can't do that if you as the manager are hoarding and owning all the
Hmm.
shit.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. It sounds like you are good at helping people.
Who knows?
So I'm sure your job has changed a lot, especially over the last few years, but how would you describe your job currently?
My job right now is, you know, I'm really enjoying it. And I think I can say that maybe for the first time in a long time. Um, I was CEO of Honeycomb for the first 3.5, 4 years. And it's a brutal job, as you know.
Yep, I hear you.
It's a brutal job. And I think there are things about me that make me particularly poorly suited to the role. I'm not a very structured person. I kind of chafe at expectations, and a big part of your job as CEO is providing structure for other people. And we talk about burnout, but like the times in my life that I have been burned out have not necessarily been the times when I was working the most. They were the times, in the startups before Parse, where I didn't feel bought in to the product or the work we were doing. I didn't really love the people I was doing it with. I didn't really respect the choices that they were making technically, or I just felt like I was being given assignments.
Hmm.
And then as CEO, I had this, it sounds kind of silly when you say it out loud, but I had nightmares that nobody's ever going to hire me again for any kind of technical role. They're just going to write me out of the technical story of the company. I'm not writing any code anymore, so they're just going to assume that I was like a PM, and I'd say that with just like sort of dismissive. I've come a ways when it comes to PM. They're just going to assume that I had nothing to do. I stopped writing the database engine. I stopped writing all this stuff. Nobody's ever going to respect me again. And I literally had nightmares about that for a very long time. Also, I just missed the work that I naively went into Honeycomb thinking, I'm super burned out. I just want to sit in the corner and write Golang for like 3 years. That's all I want to do. And instead, I jumped right into this thing that I was poorly suited for. I alienated our first few rounds of investors. All of them told me, well, if you were going to succeed, you would have succeeded by now, and we're not putting another penny in. It was just like I had this sense that I was failing every single day, and failing so many of the people who I loved best in this world, who had followed me off this cliff. And it sucked.
That's super brave to open up about. Thanks, Charity.
Well, so Christine is a much better CEO than I am, but it was a hard transition, because we had built this engineering org that doesn't need me. Emily was leading the engineering org, and so I didn't want to step on her toes. I didn't want to I am someone who is deeply motivated by being needed, by doing things that must be done. I'm not motivated by just like, well, I'm good at this work, so I'll do it, and that's motivating to me. Like,
oh yeah,
if it's being done, I think that's common for a lot of founders, but like if it's being done well, the last thing I want to do is meddle in it. And I had a lot of burnout that I was dealing with. So, I kind of flitted around like a little bit of a butterfly and kind of recovered physically, mentally, spiritually from the time as CEO. And it's really just in the past 6 months or so that I feel like I've started to really carve out a niche for myself in terms of expanding our ICP and trying to figure out how to bring observability kind of back to its roots, and also to expand it to make it more accessible to more people. Because I know that generations of engineers are starting to hit this same cliff that I hit at Parse, where your old tools that got you this far, they stop working in a way that's dramatic and terrifying.
Yeah.
And like the amount of complexity you get to it, just like all of a sudden you're because it's like we've all spent the last decade or however many of our careers really kind of working on systems that failed in somewhat predictable ways, right? So you can write monitoring checks for them, you can build dashboards for them, and it's not like they're easy, but like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. But then often you get to this place of complexity where every single time something happens, it is something completely new. And with Parse got this earlier than most because we were a platform as a service. Our users had users. Every time something broke, it was a different app hitting the iTunes top 10. You couldn't predict it. And because we had this co-tenancy model, when everything got slow, everything got slow. You couldn't tell what was making it get slow. And every single time, you're just like trying things, stabbing in the dark, try blacklisting that user, try this, try that. And it, like, the experience that we had, like, using some of the Facebook tooling on Parse was like, the amount of time it took us to debug or find these problems went from like hours, days. Often it would just resolve itself and we would never figure out what had actually happened. It went from that to like every single time you just like slice and dice, you follow the trail of breadcrumbs, click, 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 click. Oh, that's it. Like every time, like from open-ended to like seconds. Like it wasn't even an engineering problem anymore. It was like a support problem. You could just follow the trail of evidence to the data every time. And that was just like, after you've had an experience like that, you can't go back. You can't go back
I
to
love
like
the passion, and I feel like my team is always saying, Jean, we're in that before situation you're describing right now, and they're always asking me when are we going to have the time and space to move to a situation where we can debug faster. People
don't know how bad they have it.
Oh, definitely. And sometimes you know how bad you have it, but you don't know when you can make it better. And so I think that's a really great segue to just a little bit about Honeycomb and the observability movement. So for the people out there who haven't heard of Honeycomb or observability, Charity is I would say the leading evangelist in the world probably of observability. And so Charity, just really quickly for our audience, what are the changes in the industry that have made observability a must have? And what are the breaking changes you're introducing? What, if you were successful in taking over the world, how would
Right,
existing practices break?
right. We were the first to kind of propose a definition for observability that was specific to software. We kind of borrowed it from the system theory movement, which for systems like control systems, it means it's like observability is the mathematical dual of controllability and refers to how well can you understand what's happening inside the system just by observing its output. And in the early days, like 2017, 2018, we were struggling to figure out how to talk. Every term in data and telemetry is so overloaded and so overused, and everybody says the same stuff. And when we looked up observability, it really clicked because we realized, you know, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it so that just by looking at your telemetry and without shipping new custom code to handle what's going on now, can you understand any state that your system can get itself into? And if you accept that definition of observability, there's a lot of technical prerequisites that follow from it. You have to be able to handle high cardinality and high dimensionality. You have to have an explorable interface instead of just a lot of fixed dashboards. You need to have a single source of truth. You need to have all these things. And then we kind of, built to that spec. Right now, I would say the industry is kind of locked in this, I'll call it observability 1.0 world, where they're like metrics, logs, and traces,
Mm-hmm.
3 pillars, right? And the problem is that once you've accepted the idea that this is what you have, well, you're paying to store your data again and again. You
Mm-hmm.
store it as metrics, you store it as logs, you store it as traces, you store it as profiling data, you store it as APM data. You have all of these fucking
And
tools,
everyone is making money off of that.
and everybody's making bank off of it. And there's all of this, like, there's a cost crisis right now. People are getting really upset about the cost. And I think it's actually less about the dollar amount. I think it's more about the fact that they're correctly intuiting that the more their costs go up, the less value they get. Like, the value is actually decreasing because nothing connects all of these multiple sources of truth together except for you, the engineer, sitting in the middle, trying to guesstimate, correlate timestamps, visually match what's happening
Mm-hmm.
in the APMs to the
And
metrics to
it's
the
a
logs.
senior engineer who becomes a liability if they
It's
leave.
Yeah, it takes such a rich mental model for someone to sit in the middle and try to, like, reason about what's going on across your. At some point, it breaks down. It's just kind of impossible. So it makes it so that the people who can debug are the people who've been there forever,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't go on vacation because you can't. The answers to your questions do not exist in your telemetry. You have to, like, intuit them and sort of mystically deduce from the available evidence. And then when you want to ask a new question, you have to ship new code. But how do you know what to ship if you don't know what's wrong? It's like this catch 22. And so, like, I would argue that, there's some great tools out there, the Datadogs and New Relics, these are the last best dashboarding and metrics tools that are ever going to get built. But this is 20, 30-year-old tech that we're building it on top of. And I do think that the model is flawed and it will be replaced. Whether or not we're too early, I don't know, but I can guarantee you that 10 years from now, everything that we've laid out as like the observability model will be what people are doing to understand their systems because you have to. You just have
Yeah. No, I
to.
completely agree. And when I saw what you were talking about, it made so much sense to me because from the point of view of a programming languages person, logs are just too low level of abstraction. Just like
Yeah.
we don't expect new grads to be mucking around in assembly every
Yep.
day, we can't expect young developers to be coming onto these code bases and looking at the telemetry they're looking at today.
Yeah. Or trying to translate what they're doing, like the language of endpoints and variables and functions, and then like convert that into the language of low-level systems. Like, oh, I shipped this change, and
Mm-hmm,
one of
mm-hmm.
my 3 types of system memory went up, and the other 2 didn't. Like, what the fuck? You should not, you, you should not be expected to know that. Like, it
Mm-hmm,
doesn't
mm-hmm.
matter.
Yeah, the abstraction barriers are not good, especially when it comes to introspecting
Yeah.
our systems. Cool. I think that was a great description. Let's move on to breaking changes at Honeycomb. So one thing I've been super impressed with is from the outside, it looks like Honeycomb has just been, making great progress, making its mark on the industry. But I feel like every time you and I talk individually, you're telling me, oh, there's this breaking change I had to introduce last week. And, I feel like every time we finally catch up, it's because you're fresh off of a crisis and you've learned
Yeah.
from it and you've gotten it under control. So yeah, I would love for you to share some of those lessons with the world. So we'll start with the smooth part. We'll start with what's one change that you introduced smoothly and what are lessons for others, and then we'll dig into your favorite thing, the failures, next.
Oh man. It's like, honestly, I'll say in retrospect, I think we did a good job of creating the observability category,
Yeah, I
which is
agree.
ironic because when we were in the middle of it, it was full on panic and flailing every single day. Gartner's actually doing a report on us because they're like, this is a model of how you do this. And we're just like, I feel like these successes, they're only often visible in retrospect. It's
Yeah.
like, eventually you're like, oof, that worked.
Yeah, and I feel like there was a lot of doubt. I don't think it was just panic internally. When I first embarked on this and I said, hey, I want to get into this space, people said, well, is honeycomb a religion or are they actually a
I
thing?
know, I know.
People would say that to me too when I was getting into the space. And I only saw how successful you all were becoming once I got fewer questions about
Yeah.
wanting to work on observability. So I do think there was resistance. I
There was
think
a huge
creating
amount of
new categories
resistance.
is not easy.
And then, of course, around 2020, 2021, everyone was like, okay, cool. So we do observability too.
Yeah. It also shifted for me too when my investor said, "Well, everyone does observability now," and I
Yeah.
said, "Wait,
Yeah.
this is not what everyone was saying last year." But
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. The Me Too, it's a good problem to have. I acknowledge that. It's
Mm,
pretty annoying. But yeah, there's a huge amount of pushback. And I feel like that what you said about is it a religion is, you know, there is no single path. I feel like, yeah, the fact that we had so many we had a handful of rabid honeycomb fans who did a lot of evangelizing for us and a lot of sticking up for us, is one of the only reasons that we made it through those years, because we did everything wrong as a startup. This is why our first generations of investors like wrote us off, because we started by writing a storage engine. We're writing a database from the ground up. We had to do that for like a year and a half before we could even start on the interface, which every almost every founder knows is stupid. Like, you should start by finding product market fit and then write your database. But we didn't know any better, so we did it that way. And we almost went out of business many times because of it. But it's the only way you can do it. Because if we had just used something off the shelf, we would have looked and felt just like everyone else, and we wouldn't have found product market fit. And that's why I feel like, yeah, to this day, there are lots of startups coming out, building themselves as observability, and all of them are doing observability 1.0 stuff. They're
yeah.
all basing it on off the shelf metrics, logs, and traces. And that's just not going to get you very far.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we spent the first 1, 2, 3 years of Akita building our API traffic listener, and it was very
Yeah.
similar. If we hadn't done that, we would be just like every other
Just
tool.
like everyone else.
And
Mm-hmm.
we also got a lot of questioning from everyone. What have you guys been doing? Why did you only start getting users now? There was a
Yeah.
lot of the same. I just want to wrap up the category creation smoothness part of the story. So what are lessons that you think are transferable to others when it comes to, there's probably other founders out there listening, or other 0 to 1 leaders who are creating a new category or creating a new product line, and how do they create uh
Yeah.
their own rabid fans who support them no matter what, or whatever it is that they need to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like I don't know. I don't find people's answers to be useful when they try and give advice like that. I find stories to be useful because
Mm-hmm.
stories are a little more humble. It's like, this is what worked for me. Now take
Mm-hmm.
what you can derive to your own state, and make that work. I don't I don't know what I like. There are books that have been written about this and everything, but to me, I feel like you can't expect anyone else's story to be your own. You can't expect
Mm-hmm.
the path that anyone else took to get to where they are to be yours. So I think I'll avoid trying to give that kind of advice.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's talk about one change that didn't go well in the lifetime of Honeycomb, and what are lessons or what's a story that you can give people from that?
Oh boy, it's hard to it's hard to it's hard to even winnow these. Let's see. Okay, here's a theme. Here's a question that's been on my mind, so one thing that I feel really strongly about is uh, you mentioned the sort of cult-like aspects of Honeycomb, which I will absolutely cop to, uh, but I nobody's going to work here forever. And I don't want to pressure people to work here. People should only work here as long as this is the best thing that they can be doing for their career right now. And it's the manager's job to try and make sure that that goes on for as long as possible. But when it's not the best thing, like, you should leave. And I was at Linden Lab in the days when I remember us going, we're amazing. Nobody's voluntarily left in the last 2 years. And I look back now and I'm like, oof, that wasn't a good thing. It was a smell, actually. And, you know, some people probably should have been let go, but we didn't have managers. We were like, choose your own work. And there was also kind of like this low level almost pressure to stay, like you'd be letting down your
Mm.
friends or
You'd be the
something if
first
you
one to leave
left.
in 2 years. Who are
Hmm.
you?
Yeah. So at Honeycomb, we have a thing when someone leaves, we give them the option of having a graduation party. And
Mm.
everyone will come and celebrate and bring a beverage and tell stories about when they joined and the good times with them and everything. But like, we treat it like graduation because you're going on to something else that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a small
Mm-hmm.
industry and maybe we'll get to work together again. But like, we want to celebrate you and you being here. I also like always try to make sure our managers kind of have the like most of the time when something isn't working out with someone, they know that at least as well as you do. And,
Mm-hmm.
we're all adults. One of our company values is we hire adults, right? Usually, if it's time for someone to leave, you can kind of come to that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
together, right? Just being like, we've tried everything we can. And then the manager can help you. Sometimes our managers will be like, I'm helping this person get a job, or I'm
Yeah.
tweeting, or, they're awesome. And I think that's amazing. But when it comes to executive departures,
Mm.
a thing that we have learned is that um, we can't always let them own the narrative
Yeah.
that they're choosing to leave or whatever. Because one thing that, I mean, mutual respect and celebration and all these things, but um, even more important than their feelings is clarity for
Mm-hmm.
everyone
Mm-hmm.
here. Executives are not like other employees. Like with other employees, it's like you feel loyalty to them. You have loyalty to them. You want them to have loyalty to you. You can never ask someone to have more loyalty to you than you have to them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like we would ever like fire somebody if a project doesn't work or
Mm-hmm.
something like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's about their growth and their motivation and their investment and all this stuff. Um, with execs, unfortunately, it's all about results. Like,
Yeah.
you're not there to grow your career, you are there to get results for the company. And that's true of every single one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And the average tenure for an executive at a high performing startup is like 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's because it's a lot of change very quickly,
Yep.
and most people are really good at one part of the journey. Almost nobody is good at the entire journey.
Yep. And everyone understands that, and most execs are totally fine. They get their next
Every
job.
They're being paid a lot. Nobody should be like sorry for them or anything.
Yeah.
But like, this is something where, the company needs clarity. The company needs to understand this is our direction. These are our needs. This is, this is a chapter that we're turning, and this is why. So that was a lesson.
Yeah, and it can be hard to maintain trust with a team, especially if they think, well, this exec graduated. Everyone loved each other, because then, it's like, well, what do results mean then?
What do results mean, and like why? Or just questions. And clarity is super important and super important to create. And when it comes to like executives and the direction of the company, it's
that's really well said. And I feel like that's something, I see teams learning it over and over again too. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Charity. I'm sure it's not easy to keep learning these lessons. One thing I'm curious about is, what is a thing that has not changed from the beginning of Honeycomb that you're proud about?
Yeah. Let's see. One thing that has not changed is, I think Christine and I, so Parse got acquired by Facebook around Series B time. And, the acquisition was rough. Acquisitions often are. It eventually got shut down, et cetera. But Christine and I very much came away from that experience with resolve that we were not just here to build the best product that we possibly could. We were here to build a business. We were here to build a product that people would pay money for. Like when we got acquired by Facebook, I think we had one marketing person and two salespeople. We were barely even trying to monetize. Like they weren't even trying. We built a great product, but like there was not the business part was really kind of an afterthought. It was kind of the freemium thing. Like, well, let's just get a ton of users, and then later we'll ... underpants, right? And so like when we were interviewing early engineers, we didn't hire people. You can tell when engineers are not even looking down on their business counterparts, they're just kind of like alien. They're just like, they're over there.
Like, I'm an engineer, I'm doing the thing. Yeah. And then there's some business people.
Yeah. That sort of disrespect, or just like, they're not. That's not in our DNA. We hire engineers who care about the business and who don't see, their counterparts as lesser than. We hire engineers who, in the early days, they were our sales team and our marketing team, and we still, I take a lot of pride in that. I think
awesome.
that it really connects you to the impact of your work, right?
Yeah.
Caring about your users, wanting to know that your work is being well used. I mean, I think it makes a better working environment for everyone. Not to mention, you can really hire and retain better business people if you aren't shit talking them all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think this makes a lot of sense. Cool. What is one thing that has changed that surprised you, that you thought was going to be true for all of time and it's changed?
Oh boy. One thing that has changed that surprised me. Oh man.
We can also skip this question.
Something that has changed that surprised me. This is a very personal one, but like I think I never would have guessed that I could be happy not doing hands-on engineering work, or, because I think like so many engineers, especially I think so many women engineers, it's so much a part of my identity.
Yeah,
and
I am technical.
myself.
You are going to listen to my technical views.
Exactly. I think it has surprised me. I've kind of found the joy and the meaning in just doing other things that are needed for the business to succeed. And I don't feel that same sort of insecurity or need to prove myself, I think, that I did for a very long time.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I feel similarly, actually. It's been very long since I coded a lot, but I recently coded during Hack Day and I was so proud. I walked my team through every line of that code.
As you should.
Yeah, look at this clever thing I did here. Anyway, All right, so we've gotten a little bit into the people part of changes at Honeycomb. I'd love to talk more about that, especially since I've loved your blog posts about just people growth and the growth of orgs. I'm curious what you would say is the biggest difference or differences between what made someone a good fit for Honeycomb years ago versus now.
Yeah. Well, years ago, engineers were we didn't have product, we didn't have design,
Mm,
we didn't, it was just hack, 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 hack. And, you know, and, they were really, general purpose, doing everything, like I said, from doing demos to customers and, and now I think that kind of person isn't as satisfied here, because there is less agency involved. We've got specific goals we need to hit. We have, things we need to build, and so like for a long time in the early days, it was just like, here's this cool thing I thought of, boom, 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 voila, and
yeah,
there's a lot of freedom and joy in that. And I think that, you know, most of those people have moved on at this point.
hmm
There
hmm
are a few still there, but it's a much more structured. And I've actually said to Emily, maybe it was Emily who said to me, I don't know if you'd be happy here as an engineer. And I'm like, you might be right. Like I am not a super structured person. I kind of feed off of a lot of chaos. It is not a chaotic engineering team at
yeah.
all. So yeah, that's probably changed a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So related question is, how much were you able to grow or evolve your team into what's needed now versus bringing in new talent? So there's two dimensions to that question. One is the culture, as you mentioned, shifted, and two is at
Yeah,
different scales, you need different kinds of management, higher levels of management. How
yeah.
did that go?
We have a definite bias for letting people internally grow into roles.
That's awesome.
Um, I mean, I think you owe it to people. Uh, but as we've gotten farther along, we have realized, when you accept VC money, you're on a certain, very compressed time
hmm
scale, and you don't always have the luxury of giving them the time, even if they're fast learners, even if they're quick, you don't always have the luxury of giving them the time to grow into it.
Yeah, I've heard
Because
from many people only the CEO is allowed to grow into their job.
to a certain extent, yeah. Um, yeah, it does feel like cheating being a founder because you get away with a lot of shit that like I feel guilty about it on the
Yeah, you're
regular.
like,
I'm
well, I
like,
came up with this whole company, so
I'm like, shouldn't I be held to a slightly higher standard? No, I joke. I actually try really hard to like apply the same standards to myself as to
mm-hmm.
other people, but like I would never have been hired to be CTO or CEO, if that's what I mean. Um, we so I would say it's been a balance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and it's something I was going to mention too about um, when we were talking about people leaving and the departures and stuff. And this is actually true of being able to grow people into stuff too. Is that we're a very transparent company.
Mm-hmm.
We always walk people through the board slides and let them know how the board is reacting. We
That's
talk through
awesome.
our strategy. We talk through our OKRs. We're a very transparent company, which means that when we can't be transparent, sometimes people wig out a little. And this tends to happen often with departures and stuff. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, we, we need to like acknowledge that we care about transparency, but it's not our only value. We also care about people's privacy and dignity. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
there are sometimes as leaders, you just have to ask your people to trust you and be like, either I've earned your trust in this way or I haven't. That's up to you to say, but like these are details that, we're choosing not to share. And to some extent, like these career conversations fall into that bucket too. It's like
Yeah.
when you default to being super transparent, like you need to sometimes remind people, we're not hiding this from you,
Yeah.
but we can't just tell you that, like, it wouldn't be fair. We wouldn't do this about you. So,
Yeah.
we
And
can't do
there
this
are
about
legal
other people.
concerns. Yeah.
Or legal concerns. Yeah,
Yeah. I know that
exactly.
makes sense. Cool. Something I'm curious about is Honeycomb has been around for long enough and you've been hiring for even longer that we've seen some waves of industry change during this time. And I'm wondering if you've changed the way you hire or how you select for people, or, how you define what makes a successful hire.
Yeah, you know, it's been amazing as we have gotten through each successive stage of growth. I feel like the caliber of the people that we've been able to attract, I mean, on the engineering and the R&D side, it's been almost unfair. Like at the caliber of people that we've consistently been able to attract, it's just like people I'm dying to work with. I'm just like, I don't
That's
think we can get
amazing.
them. And then, but over the last few years, I feel like we've started to get to that point on the go-to-market side as well. And that's been really rewarding, because
That's
they're looking at
awesome.
us through a completely different lens with completely different criteria.
Like
And
the go to market is working now versus this is a big bet. Am I willing to go
yeah,
there? Yeah, that's
yeah.
awesome.
I mean, at each stage, we've gotten some amazing people, but it is pretty nice. It's validating. Um, I
Cool.
I would say in terms of like our values, um, they've been pretty consistent. I
Hmm.
will say that one thing that's changed a lot about the way that we interview and hire is I used to be really big on everyone gets a voice,
Yeah.
and anyone can say no.
Hmm.
I think I've scaled back on that ambition. It's more like the people who are really directly impacted by this, because
Hmm.
otherwise, if you ask people to have an opinion, they're going to give you an opinion.
Yeah,
But
consensus is really, really hard for making fast
yeah,
progress.
yeah, and if the only thing worse than not asking someone for their opinion is asking for it and then not using it or
Hmm.
caring about it
Hmm.
and seeming to
Hmm.
just like, oh, so
Yeah, I
yeah, I
love
think,
that. That's
you
so
know,
true.
yeah, so I think, trying to be a little bit more judicious and just like, no, everyone doesn't get to weigh in on everything. You get to weigh in on the things that really impact you,
Hmm.
and we'll take it
Hmm.
seriously.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about change in the industry. So specifically, I want to talk about hype. I've seen you give really good takes. People are replying to my threads like all the time with your takes on this latest thing, dev tools and AI, other things. How do you think about leveraging hype while staying true to long-term vision? Because you're someone I really respect, as you're on your path, you're going down it, but at the same time you're balancing responding to trends and conversations. So
Yeah,
how do you think about that balance?
I think about it, and I feel really fortunate to feel like with the observability stuff that we're like, it doesn't feel like we're trying to sell people. It feels like we're trying to help people, because I see it in their lives, the difference it makes when they adopt Honeycomb. And I think that that's something that infuses throughout the entire company, that it's like, you don't feel dirty about like trying to like, you know, knock on someone's door or try to get them to try it, because you know how much it's going to help them. So I feel really strongly rooted in that. And then I feel like the waves of hype, I mean, I can get kind of snarky about them too, but like really what most of them are kind of trial balloons. People are, because technology is not just about the lines of code that we write. It's also about how do people use this technology? Where does it fit? How do you
Mm-hmm,
apply
mm-hmm.
it? Marketing done well is just trying to connect the right people with the right stuff. Um, and and I feel like, so like the waves of hype, I really feel are just like opportunities to like hold up a slightly different mirror to yourself and
I love it.
going like, does this make sense from where I sit? How does this interact with the stuff that I think about? Like when the platform engineering stuff came by, I was like, oh shit, like this applies so much to the stuff that I've been thinking about the
Mm-hmm.
future of operations jobs and how we're becoming more product mindset. So I 1000% jumped on that hype bandwagon. I'm like, fuck yeah,
It
I
makes
want to have a
sense.
voice in how we're talking about platform engineering, because it's so dovetails with how we see the world. And then like the AI stuff comes by, and it's like, well, some of this, honestly, like the generative AI stuff, the using LLMs, I have this deep seated hope that this becomes the Trojan horse that helps so many engineering teams learn how to do observability driven development and learn how to incorporate production as they're writing the code, and I'm genuinely excited about that. I also think there's a whole bunch of bullshit that's just like they're trial balloons that aren't really tethered to anything real. But I think that there's some really interesting stuff there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Charity. I am all right on a subject of a different kind of change, and this is our last main question. Is I feel you've been a real pioneer when it comes to changing the industry, changing the makeup of executive teams. Honeycomb has, I think, more female executives than most other startups I've seen. Do you have advice about hiring and fostering inclusive culture for the leaders out there?
I will say that I know I've said this a few times, but like we had so many near death moments in the first few years of Honeycomb. And one of the things that contributed to us sticking around was the caliber of the talent that we were able to hire and retain. And in those early days when we didn't have much at all, a lot of that was just because so many people were so tired of working for all straight white dudes. And they were just
I
like,
love that.
and it's like, it kind of rankled me a little. I was like, oh, you want to work with us because we're few. Is there anything else about us that you like? I mean, it's kind of like someone being like, you're a woman, I want to date you. And it's like, okay, is there anything else about me that you like? You know, but like, don't underestimate that. There is a thirst in this industry for not just lip service, but for real representation at the top. Like, if you want to be able to recruit a diverse team, make sure you have diverse leadership. There are so many people out there who are qualified. There are not many opportunities to become an exec. And then once you've been an exec, you get offer after offer after offer after offer. There is like a field out there of senior directors of engineering who are just waiting to get tapped for their first, role as a VP. So yeah, I feel like, it's a little bit unfair for us to have this advantage because Christine and I didn't. We just were women, so we just had to deal with it, But it's been a huge advantage for us. I can't say that enough.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. Now we're going to move into our rapid fire closing questions. So, what are the most underrated breaking changes in the industry right now?
The most underrated breaking changes in the industry right now. This is a little bit self-serving, but I feel like it can't be stressed enough. The shift from software engineers, their world is, their IDE, to the shift where their world is production can't be emphasized enough. And there's so many things that this feeds into. It's like, are you using feature flags? Are you using observability? Are you using?
Yeah, I am on that train 100%. So I love that you're talking about it.
The center of gravity has got to move to production because it, and the thing is that people are always like, oh, it's so much. It seems like it slows you down, but it doesn't. This is how you create those fast feedback loops that let you move swiftly with confidence. Right now, the reason people can't move fast in large part is because every day they're shipping code they don't really understand out to systems that they've never really understood. And the whole thing just like a fucking hairball that the cat coughed up. No wonder anytime you try and change anything, it takes forever. And the only way you dig yourself out of that is to start being able to understand your shit bit by painful bit. So,
Yep. Yeah, the shift from dev tools to prod tools is I'm very much behind. And I agree, underrated. All right, next question. I have to ask, what's your hot take on breaking changes of AI? Where's AI going to break the most stuff?
AI, oh God, I don't know. I don't know where AI is going to break the most stuff. It's going to break all over. But I will say this, the places that it's really, the breakage is really going to matter, I think, is when engineering execs in particular try to start buying the message that they don't have to understand their systems anymore because the machines will do it for you. Like, this was my problem with AI ops. It was like, no, you don't need to like worry about understanding your telemetry. Just like point this AI ops at it and it will tell you what you need to pay attention to.
If you are relying on AI, you have to understand it better.
Exactly. I think that like there's a lot of potential in AI to help you understand it better, not to replace. And I get it. Like, it was a shock to me the first time I heard that to a lot of CTOs and VPs, they trust their vendors more than they trust their people because people come and go, but vendors are forever. And I was just like, so if the vendor shows up and is like, pay me $10 million and your people don't have to understand your shit, they cough up for it. That is not going to, you are setting a trap of pain for yourself.
Love that. So true. All right. And what change, personal or professional, are you excited about most, or, more excited about? What's one of the top 5 most exciting changes in your life this year?
We're gearing up for Swarm, our in-person. Everyone's going to be in person in a month, and I can't wait.
Oh, love it.
But I also feel like we're at a place now where we've got the right people in place. I think that real observability, like 2.0 observability, is going to start reaching the masses in a new and interesting way. And I really believe that people are going to be in such a better place when they start to understand how much better the world can be.
Awesome. Great. And if people love what they heard and they want to read more, hear more from you, where can they find you?
My blog is charity.wtf. We also put a lot of stuff on the honeycomb.io blog, and I still Twitter at Nipsey Tipsy.
Great. Thank you, Charity.
Thanks, Steve.